Grace Kelly made 11 films in 5 years. Then she made none. At 52, her story ended on a road she knew. She won the Academy Award at 25. She married Prince Rainier III of Monaco at 26. Monaco gave her a palace. The palace had begun as a fortress. It sat above the sea. It was not built for fairy tales. It was built to hold. For 26 years, Grace lived as Princess of Monaco. She raised Caroline, Albert, and Stéphanie. She hosted dignitaries. She gave Monaco the glamour of the career she had surrendered. Months before her final drive, she told a magazine she was coping. Then she drove down from Rock Angel. The road curved toward Monaco. The journey never reached the palace. Her daughter sat beside Stéphanie, was 17. Her wedding dress came from MGM. The studio had helped shape her screen image. It dressed her once more for the role that ended it. The road ahead narrows before it breaks. If another royal house belongs in this series, leave its name below. A quiet like or subscription helps keep these histories within reach. Here, we open the rooms royal families prefer closed and stay with the people inside. Long before it held Grace Kelly, the palace above Monaco was built to keep danger out. In June 1215, Genoese ships loaded with building supplies anchored in the harbour beneath the promontory. The consul Fulco de Castello began building a fortress there. 37 sections of rampart braced by 4 heavy towers, designed not for beauty but for defence against piracy. 7 centuries later, the palace still stands, though the first fortress was rebuilt, expanded, damaged, and transformed. The first walls were never meant for fairy tales. They were meant to hold ground. The Republic of Genoa controlled the harbour and the trade routes around it for nearly a century. Then, on January 8, 1297, a man named Francois Grimaldi arrived at the fortress gate. He was dressed in the robes of a Franciscan monk. The guards admitted him. Once inside, he overcame the guard and opened the way for his men to capture the fortress. The Grimaldis took the rock not through inheritance, not through treaty, but through performance. The founding story of Monaco's ruling house is not a coronation. It is a disguise. Centuries passed. The fortress became a palace. The Grimaldis survived wars, bankruptcies, and the ambitions of larger nations. By the time Grace entered it, the palace had already spent centuries learning how to survive. Its walls had been thickened, its rooms softened, and its defences wrapped in ceremony. By the time the nearby Monaco Cathedral was consecrated in 1911, built on the site of a 13th century parish church, the rock had become both sovereign seat and burial ground. Its first purpose was defence. By the early 20th century, Monaco had a casino, a cathedral, and a royal family whose sovereignty depended on the tolerance of larger nations. Prince Louis II ruled one of Europe's smallest sovereign states. When Rainier III inherited the throne on May 9, 1949, Monaco's old casino economy was under pressure from revived gambling in neighbouring France. And the rock was still what it had always been, a fortress perched on the edge of someone else's sea. It needed a new kind of disguise. The house at 3901 Henry Avenue in East Falls, Philadelphia, was built in 1928 by a bricklayer's son who had won Olympic gold in sculling. John B. Kelly Sr. raised his children inside the structure his own money and muscle had made. Grace was the third of 4. She grew up in rooms where ambition was not a feeling but a family trade, where height marks were penciled on the closet door, and where leaving was understood as the price of a career beyond the Kelly family house on Henry Avenue. Grace left Philadelphia as a young woman to study acting in New York. She enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, supported herself through modeling work, and moved into the television and theater world of the early 1950s with the same Kelly family seriousness that had shaped a household built around work, sport, and public achievement. She did not wait to be discovered. She arrived prepared. Hollywood noticed quickly. By 1952, she had appeared in her first major film role, opposite Gary Cooper in High Noon. Hitchcock saw controlled stillness. The camera turned it into suspense. Britannica records that Hitchcock saw a distinctive screen elegance in her and cast her in 3 films: Dial M, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief. She was 23 years old and already building a career not on volume but on precision. Selecting roles the way her father had selected brick, one at a time, each one load-bearing. Back in East Falls, the house on Henry Avenue stood unchanged behind its brick facade. Grace did not return to it as a resident. She returned as a visitor, then as a public name attached to the house where her childhood bed and family height marks would still survive decades later. The distance from that house was about to become permanent. One year remade her career, the next ended it. In 1954, Grace Kelly appeared in 3 films: Hitchcock's Dial M, Rear Window, and The Country Girl. Hitchcock directed 2 of them. The third won her the Academy Award for Best Actress at the ceremony on March 30th, 1955. She was 25 years old. Her career had reached a height that left almost nowhere higher to climb, which made what happened next feel less like a fairy tale and more like a calculation. Dial M opened in May 1954. Rear Window followed in August. The Country Girl arrived in December. 3 major studio releases in 7 months. 2 directed by Alfred Hitchcock, already one of the most recognizable filmmakers in American cinema. The Academy awarded Grace Best Actress for The Country Girl, not for either of her Hitchcock films that year. She accepted the award in a pale blue satin gown. She was composed. What the audience at the Pantages Theatre saw that night was the finished product of 5 years of unbroken professional ascent. What they did not see was that her film career had almost reached its final frame. Grace still had 2 1956 films ahead, The Swan and High Society. After High Society, the screen career ended. The woman holding the gold statuette in March 1955 had roughly 12 months of her film career remaining, though no one in that theatre knew it yet. Somewhere on the Mediterranean coast, a 31-year-old prince was looking for a wife. Monaco needed an heir. It also needed an image. The fortress on the rock had survived 7 centuries of war, diplomacy, and financial pressure. It had not yet tried glamour. Grace Kelly had exactly the right face for that experiment. The meeting began as a photo opportunity. The marriage became something Monaco could use. In May 1955, during the Cannes Film Festival, Grace visited the Prince's Palace in Monaco and met Rainier III for the first time. By January 1956, the engagement was public. The civil ceremony took place on April 18, 1956, and the religious wedding the following day in Monaco Cathedral. Her wedding dress was designed by Helen Rose and sewn by the wardrobe department at MGM. It was the last garment that the studio would ever make for her. Monaco required 2 ceremonies before a marriage became real. The civil wedding on April 18 followed the Napoleonic Code still governing the Principality's legal system. The religious ceremony the next day, inside the cathedral built on the site of a 13th century church, followed Catholic canon law. Life magazine covered both. Photographers filled the cathedral nave. The press corps outnumbered the invited guests. The scale of the coverage was not incidental. That was the point. The palace itself watched from above. Its walls, 8 centuries old by then, had seen Grimaldi weddings before. None had drawn the world's cameras. The ceremony placed the palace's state rooms and cathedral rituals before a global audience. But beneath the coverage, the structure remained what it had always been. A defensive position on a rock, built to hold ground, not to host romance. Grace was 26 years old. She had won the highest award her industry could give and worked with directors like Alfred Hitchcock, Fred Zinnemann, and George Seaton. She set all of it down. The result was specific. Her film career ended, her royal role began, and Monaco gained a princess the world already knew. Hollywood lost one of its most precise young actresses. Monaco gained the image it needed. The record used here preserves the ceremony, not Grace's private words when the palace doors closed behind her. Monte Carlo's own corporate history records what happened next in plain commercial language. The 1956 marriage drew the eyes of the international press to the royal family. Monaco's business volume doubled between 1959 and 1962, reaching roughly $200 million annually, and the number of corporations based in the Principality climbed to 542. Rainier was pulling Monaco away from the old casino economy. He was also pulling it away from Aristotle Onassis, who held 52% of the company that controlled the casino, the yacht club, the Hôtel de Paris, and about a third of Monaco's land. Grace's fame was not merely ornamental, it became part of Monaco's public image, while Rainier rebuilt the Principality's economy. Before Grace gave Monaco glamour, Onassis had already taken hold of its money. In 1952, the Greek shipping magnate invested roughly $1.5 million to acquire his controlling stake in the Société de Bennes de Mer. The company's properties included the gaming rooms, the grand hotels, the harbour facilities. Onassis did not need Monaco to be sovereign. He needed it to be profitable. Rainier needed both. That difference shaped everything that followed. The prince's strategy was diversification. He pushed new construction along the waterfront, created the Monte Carlo Television Festival in January 1961, and began land reclamation at the Larvotto that November. Grace hosted visiting dignitaries, attended galas, and lent her presence to events that drew press attention to Monaco. She was not merely decorative. Her presence made Monaco's galas, festivals, state visits, and charity events more visible abroad. Caroline and Albert arrived within the first 2 years. The Principality now had an heir, a princess the world recognized, and a revenue model that no longer depended entirely on roulette. But the image Monaco projected worked best when Grace remained what the Principality expected her to be. Not an actress, not an artist, a princess, full-time, with no visible seam between the woman and the role. By 1956, the palace had learned how to preserve an image once it entered the walls. The first crack came when Grace asked the palace for one piece of herself back. Grace asked for one return to acting, and Monaco treated it like a breach of duty. In 1962, Alfred Hitchcock wanted her for Marnie, a psychological thriller about a woman trapped inside compulsive lies. A florist in the Principality was quoted rejecting the idea of a part-time princess. Grace herself later acknowledged the attempt had not gone well with the public because it was considered incompatible with her place. The chance passed. It did not come again. Somewhere in the palace that season, the walls held firm while the woman inside them learned exactly how permanent her trade had been. The Marnie offer was not casual. Hitchcock had directed Grace in 3 of her most important films. He had shaped the screen image that made her famous, and he wanted her back. Grace wanted the role, but public reaction in Monaco made clear how many people rejected the idea. What followed was not a private negotiation between a woman and a director. It became a public test of what Monaco would tolerate. Ordinary citizens objected. The press framed the question as a matter of royal duty versus personal vanity. Grace was not only facing a private decision, the role did not disappear for one reason. Public reaction in Monaco made the return look impossible. Palace duty made it difficult. Family life made it harder still. Then the part went to Tippi Hedren. Hitchcock made Marnie without Grace, and the film that might have reopened her old life became the proof that the way back had narrowed. Marnie opened in 1964 without her. Publicly, the failed return hardened into silence. Grace never starred in another feature. After the wedding, the number did not change again. 11 films, all behind her. The arithmetic told the story more plainly than any statement of intent. She had traded the possibility of a continuing artistic life for the certainty of a continuing public role. The trade was not reversible. The palace had not locked her in. It had simply made clear that the passage only went one way. Hitchcock, who had built 3 of his finest performances around her stillness, never directed her again. 25 years passed between his last film with Grace and his death in 1980. In those years, Grace attended premieres, hosted film festivals, and watched other actresses accept the roles she had been built for. She was 32 years old and already past the point of return. What followed the closed door was not grief, but something quieter and harder to name. By the mid-1960s, the cost of Grace's royal role had become visible in one documented fact: she missed acting, and she had not returned to it. She had 3 children: Caroline, born January 23, 1957, Albert, born March 14, 1958, Stéphanie, born February 3, 1965. She had founded the foundation Princess Grace in 1964 and created a Maid Mondiale the year before. She joined the board of 20th Century Fox in 1976. She narrated a documentary. She published a book about flowers. These projects kept her near the arts, but none restored the feature film career she had left behind. In 1964, she told the Los Angeles Times 2 words that carried more weight than any speech: "I miss acting." The documentary she narrated was called The Children of Theatre Street. It followed young ballet students at the Kirov School in Leningrad and was later nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. Grace did not perform in it, she narrated it. The distinction mattered. She could lend her voice to someone else's art, but not inhabit a role of her own. Grace died before the only acted film project she attempted as princess was finished. In 1979, she and Rainier began work on a short independent film titled Rearranged. It was never completed for wider release. Grace died before more scenes could be shot. The pattern repeated across 2 decades. Each attempt at creative expression was partial, interrupted, or constrained by the boundaries of the role she had accepted in 1956. She published My Book of Flowers with Gwen Robins in 1980. It was a book about pressed flowers and botanical illustration, arranged with care by a woman who had once commanded the attention of every major studio in Hollywood. It was a project safely compatible with her public role, far from the risk of a full return to acting. The same staterooms remained above the harbor, carrying layers of decoration, ceremony, and later restoration. Grace moved through those corridors for 26 years, building cultural institutions, raising 3 children, representing a sovereign family to the world. Publicly, she continued the work, cultural boards, foundation duties, official receptions, and family obligations. But the 2 words she had spoken in 1964 never stopped being true. The restriction did not look like imprisonment. It looked like duty. While Grace managed her public image, Rainier fought for the principality's survival on a different front. In 1962, France pressured Monaco to revise its tax privileges. Rainier refused, saying the demands meant the end of our liberties. The crisis exposed the truth beneath the glamour. Monaco existed because larger powers allowed it to exist. Grace's role in Monaco's image was not merely ceremonial. Her presence helped keep cameras pointed at the rock while Rainier fought larger economic battles. The fortress above the harbor looked the same as it had for centuries, but the weight it carried had changed. France did not threaten invasion, it threatened something quieter and more effective. The pressure was fiscal and direct. Revise your tax laws or face economic isolation. Monaco's entire model depended on offering corporations and wealthy residents what France would not. If that advantage disappeared, the principality's financial architecture collapsed. Monaco was less than a square mile of sovereign territory. Rainier understood this. His resistance was not theatrical. It was existential. The numbers told the story. The growth that had doubled Monaco's business volume since 1959 could reverse just as quickly if France decided to close the border to Monaco's financial advantages. The old casino model was already weakened. After the war, renewed gambling in neighboring France had cut into Monte Carlo's profits. Annecy still controlled 52% of the Saucy de Bain de Mer. Rainier was exposed on 2 fronts. French pressure from outside. Foreign capital dominance from within. International attention did not solve the crisis, but it gave Rainier a more visible stage on which to resist French pressure. The crisis eventually resolved through negotiation, but the lesson beneath it did not fade. Monaco's sovereignty was conditional. It depended on revenue, on reputation, and on the willingness of larger powers to let a principality smaller than a Paris arrondissement continue to exist on its own terms. Every gala Grace attended, every press photograph, every state visit she accompanied helped make the cost of pressuring Monaco slightly higher than the cost of leaving it alone. Grace's work was not abstract. It happened in rooms full of flashbulbs, visiting ministers, charity patrons, and journalists watching for the old actress inside the new princess. She had learned to hold still for Hitchcock. Monaco asked her to hold still for the state. The crisis eventually resolved through negotiation, but the underlying lesson did not fade. Monaco's independence was conditional, and the condition, in large part, was Grace continuing to be exactly what she had been since 1956. She was the soft power behind a hard throne. That made her valuable. It also made her irreplaceable, and irreplaceable people are rarely free. One of Grace's last interviews was a correction, not a fairy tale. In April 1982, months before her death, Grace sat for one of her last major interviews. She told People magazine that she did not think of her life as a fairy tale. She described herself as a modern, contemporary woman who is still coping. She also said that all a person truly has is their name and reputation, and she resisted unauthorized dramatizations of her story. She had spent years watching others write versions of her life that she did not recognize. 5 months later, her death would become exactly what she feared: a story seized and retold by strangers before her family could even bury her. By 1982, Grace had been Princess of Monaco for 26 years. She was 52. She had been Princess of Monaco for almost exactly as long as she had lived before the wedding. Caroline was 25 and recently divorced from her first husband, Philippe Junot. Albert was 24, recently graduated from Amherst, and still before the formal state role he would begin in 1984. Stéphanie was 17, still living at home, still inside the family structure that revolved around palace schedules and public duties. Grace's daily life by this point was organizational, institutional, and largely invisible to the public that still imagined her in a tiara. She ran cultural boards, managed foundation work, and attended state functions with practiced composure. For a quarter century, she converted celebrity into diplomacy. But none of it returned her to the work she had trained to do. The palace around her had not changed. The state apartments still open for visitors each season. The frescoed corridors still led to the same reception rooms where she stood beside Rainier and smiled for the same cameras that had once filmed her in close-up for Hitchcock. The setting was identical. The role was the only one left. The People interview is one of the few moments where the private reality surfaces in print. Grace did not dramatize her dissatisfaction. She simply refused the narrative others kept placing on her. She was not living in a fairy tale. She was coping, not thriving, not enchanted. Coping. 5 months stood between that interview and the road from Rock Eagle. What happened on that road would take 20 years and 6 words to settle. On September 13, 1982, Grace and her youngest daughter Stéphanie left Rock Eagle, the Grimaldi family's weekend retreat in the hills above Monaco, and drove toward the palace. The road drops through steep hairpin bends. The Mediterranean was visible below. Stéphanie was 17. A post-mortem later concluded that a severe stroke caused Grace to lose control of the car while negotiating the curves. The rover left the road. Stéphanie survived with serious injuries to her ribs, neck, and collarbone. Grace was taken to the hospital that bore her name. She never regained consciousness. The road between Rock Eagle and the palace descended through steep hairpin bends above Monaco. Grace knew the road. She had driven it for years. The retreat at Rockagle was the family's private space, the one place where palace schedules did not follow them. The drive was routine, Rockagle above, palace below. On September 13, it became Grace's last passage between private life and duty. The rover left the road on a bend and fell down the hillside below. Inside, Stéphanie was thrown against the interior as the passenger side was badly damaged. The passenger door could no longer be used. Emergency crews reached them on the slope below the road. Grace was unconscious. She was transported to the Centre Hospitalier Princess Grace, the hospital that had carried her name since 1958, 24 years before it received her as a patient. Initial reports from the palace described a car accident and injuries. They did not describe the cause. For hours, the world believed the princess might recover. The medical reality was different, and the palace did not correct the impression. Doctors would later disclose that Grace had suffered a severe medical event before the car left the road. The medical crisis came first. The impact followed. Grace did not lose control because of the road itself. The woman who had spent 26 years being watched by the world died on a road where no one was watching at all. The palace offered hope first. The doctors later revealed how little hope remained. Doctors at the Centre Hospitalier Princess Grace worked through the night of September 13 and into the following day. Initial palace communications created the impression that Grace might survive. The Washington Post later reported what the medical team disclosed on September 17. Grace had suffered 2 severe strokes of equal intensity, one apparently before the car left the road and one afterward, by roughly 6 p.m. On September 14, doctors considered her beyond recovery. Rainier decided she should not be kept alive artificially. The children agreed. The machines were stopped. The gap between the crash and the full disclosure was 4 days. Early reports described a traffic accident, injuries, and a hospitalized princess. They did not describe how grave her condition had already become before the car left the road. The neurologist treating Grace, Dr. Jean Duplay, later confirmed that the prognosis had been clear from the start. Down the corridor, in the same hospital that bore her mother's name, Stéphanie was recovering from her own injuries. She was 17 years old and had no public voice of her own. Grace died on September 14, 1982. She was 52 years old. She had lived 26 years before the wedding and 26 years after it. The full medical account did not reach the public until September 17. By then, the story had already escaped the hospital. It moved into newspapers, palace statements, gossip columns, and finally into Stéphanie's life. Grace was gone. Her daughter remained inside the unanswered version. Stéphanie survived the car, then spent 20 years trapped inside the rumor. For 20 years, speculation claimed she had been driving, or that she and Grace had been arguing in the car. In 2002, she said it plainly, "I was not driving, that's clear." She explained she had been thrown around inside the vehicle and escaped from the driver's side because the passenger door had been crushed. The confusion lingered for years, and Stéphanie later said she had waited in vain for her family to defend her. The same machinery that had turned Grace into a symbol now left her 17-year-old daughter undefended against rumor. The rumor began almost immediately and proved nearly impossible to silence. Stéphanie was young, injured, and grieving. She was also the only surviving person inside the car. The medical conclusion pointed to a stroke before the crash, which meant Grace had likely been incapacitated at the wheel before the rover left the road. That explanation was clear, clinical, and supported by the post-mortem. It did not satisfy the public imagination. A stroke was medical. A princess dying on a hairpin road while her teenage daughter sat beside her was a story, and stories demand more than a medical report. So the rumor grew. Tabloids speculated that Stéphanie had been driving, or that mother and daughter had been arguing, that something more dramatic than a medical event in the brain had caused the crash. Stéphanie spent 2 decades under that weight. She interned at Christian Dior under Marc Bohan from 1983 to 1984. She built a life. She carried the accusation with her through all of it. Stéphanie later said she had waited in vain for her family to come to her defense. Whatever the palace did or did not say, the rumor survived for 20 years. The institution that had controlled Grace's image for decades offered no comparable protection to her youngest daughter. Stéphanie waited 20 years to say 6 words. Grace was buried in Monaco Cathedral on September 18, 1982. Rainier never remarried. He did not replace Grace with another princess. He replaced her absence with foundations, appointments, libraries, and rituals. Within months, he appointed Caroline to lead the Garden Club, the Monte Carlo Arts Festival Organizing Committee, and the Princess Grace Foundation. In 1984, he opened the Princess Grace Irish Library, a tribute to Grace's ancestry and her personal book collection. In 1985, Caroline announced the creation of the Ballets de Monte Carlo, described by the palace as fulfilling one of Grace's cultural wishes. Rainier governed for 23 more years. He died on April 6, 2005, and was buried beside her. After Grace's death, Rainier and the family preserved her name through institutions, the Princess Grace Foundation USA in 1982, Caroline's cultural appointments that December, and the Princess Grace Irish Library in 1984. The Princess Grace Foundation USA supports emerging artists in theatre, dance, and film. The irony is structural. The foundation created in Grace's name funds exactly the kind of creative careers that Grace herself had been unable to continue. The Irish Library is quieter. Opened in November 1984, it preserves Grace's personal collection and honors her family's roots in County Mayo. It is not a grand palace memorial. It is a room full of books that belong to a woman who read. Of all the memorials built in Grace's name, this one says the least and reveals the most. Among the cultural tributes Rainier commissioned, this one comes closest to the private person rather than the public symbol. Caroline took on the roles Grace had filled and expanded them. In 1985, she announced the Ballets de Monte Carlo. In 1981, before her mother's death, she had already founded Jeune J'écoute, a youth support association. She became the cultural anchor of the family, carrying forward work that her mother had started and never had the chance to complete. Rainier died on April 6, 2005. He was buried beside Grace. The palace had been hiding older stories behind its walls for centuries. During restorations beginning in the 2010s, crews uncovered roughly 600 square meters of Italian Renaissance frescoes inside the prince's palace, with major discoveries and public display emerging by 2022. The images depicted Hercules, Odysseus, and Europa. Ancient stories of transformation, captivity, and divine disguise had been buried inside the same walls where Grace's modern myth had been constructed and maintained. Grace never saw those frescoes uncovered. The palace was hiding old stories even from the woman who had become its most famous modern one. The frescoes had been covered for generations, painted over and plastered as tastes changed. Many were hidden beneath later layers and revealed only during modern restoration. Inside the same palace where Grace lived, modern restorers later uncovered images of Europa, a woman taken from her homeland by a god in disguise, and Odysseus, a man who spent decades trying to return to the life he had been taken from. The parallels were not designed. They were simply present, buried in the architecture, waiting. The restoration revealed the kind of building Grace had lived inside. One layer hiding another, one story painted over by the next. Renaissance art had survived under later plaster. The palace was never one story. It was one surface placed over another. The building that staged Grace's wedding, hosted her public duties, and outlived her by decades had been hiding older stories beneath its ceremonial surfaces the entire time. Visitors now see restored mythological frescoes in the palace rooms and corridors. The tourists photograph the myths. They do not always notice that the building itself is one. While the palace preserved the princess, one place still preserved the girl. In 2016, Prince Albert II bought back the Kelly family home at 3901 Henry Avenue in Philadelphia. Architectural Digest reported that the house still held small, charged details. Grace's twin bed, the closet door marked with the heights of the Kelly children as they grew. Albert restored the property, but not as a conventional public museum. It became a family and foundation space, still tied to Grace, but not handed completely to tourists. Across the ocean, the Prince's Palace opens its state apartments to visitors each year, from spring to autumn. In 2026, tours run from March 30 to October 15. The fortress is 800 years old. It will outlast every name carved into its story. The two buildings sit on opposite sides of the Atlantic, and they remember Grace in opposite ways. The palace remembers the princess, the public figure, the diplomatic asset, the cultural patron, the woman who stood in state rooms and smiled for cameras for 26 years. The Philadelphia house remembers the girl, the height marks, the twin bed, the rooms where she grew before anyone outside East Falls knew her name. Albert kept Grace's childhood house from becoming another royal display. A museum would have turned the house into another performance, another managed image, another version of Grace curated for strangers. By refusing to make it a dedicated museum, Albert kept the house from becoming only another public display of Grace. She was just Grace Kelly, third of four, her height marked in pencil on a closet door alongside her brother and sisters. The palace will continue to open each spring. Tourists will walk through the state rooms where the frescoes now glow on restored ceilings. They will photograph the cour d'honneur and the view from the ramparts across the harbour. They will learn about the Grimaldis and the fortress and the monk who opened the gate in 1297. Some will pause at the cathedral next door, where Grace and Rainier lie side by side on the floor. The building remembers everyone who entered it, and it forgets none of them, and it needs none of them to stand. The Prince's Palace opens each spring the way it has for decades. Visitors buy tickets at the base of the rock and climb the narrow streets to the cordon. They enter state rooms layered over a fortress whose first purpose, 8 centuries earlier, was defense. Hercules, Odysseus, Europa, old myths looked down from the ceilings, newly visible after centuries under plaster. The tourists photograph the ceilings. They move through the corridors. They tour the state apartments while the family's private spaces remain outside the public route. Next door, Monaco Cathedral holds its silence. The nave that carried Grace's wedding to millions of television viewers is quiet most days now. The pews face the altar. The light comes through the same windows. In the floor near the front, 2 stone slabs mark where Rainier and Grace lie side by side. He died in 2005. She died in 1982. The cathedral hosted both their wedding and their burial. The building that staged the beginning also closed the end. Above the harbour, the palace still stands where Grace's public life began. The fortress began under Fulco di Castello in 1215, then survived by being rebuilt, thickened, damaged, restored, and painted over. The palace still faces the Mediterranean from the rock, where the Grimaldis first seized the fortress in 1297. The rock has outlasted every name attached to it. It held Grace for 26 years. Then it kept standing. But in Philadelphia, a closet door still carries pencil marks where the Kelly children stood to be measured. And in a museum in the city where she grew up, a wedding dress sits behind glass. It was designed by Helen Rose. It was sewn in the wardrobe department at MGM. The studio that helped create Grace Kelly made the dress for Princess Grace. After that, Monaco dressed her for the cameras, and the role never released her.